Well, benedicite Dominus, and welcome to question 159 of the Secunda Secundae. The topic for this lecture is cruelty, and I am Dr. Thibault. So we are looking at the potential parts of temperance, and we've looked at clemency and meekness as potential parts of temperance. And now we are looking at the vices associated with clemency and meekness. So with anger, we needed the virtue of meekness to balance it. And now with cruelty, we have clemency to balance it. So we are going to look at cruelty at this time. Now this is only 2 articles long, so this is much faster than anger, which was, I believe, 8 articles long, much more difficult. So cruelty is opposed to clemency, the first article. Cruelty takes its name from cruditas, which we say is rawness, but you probably, if you are a culinary person, are aware of cruditas anyway, which is a raw vegetable, so it's raw. And St. Thomas says these raw vegetables are bitter. They're not that appetizing. It's when you cook them and you prepare them and you do something good with them, then they become savory and good. He says that's clemency, right? So clemency is that smoothness or sweetness of the soul, and it mitigates punishment. So clemency is a delicious meal, and cruelty is bitter and raw, as the imagery that St. Thomas uses. Harsh punishment is an injustice, but the hardness of heart which makes one ready to increase punishment belongs to cruelty. So that's a distinction there. So if one were just to have harsh punishments, this is really under the virtue of justice, right? It would be an injustice to make a penalty too strong. Well, we're not dealing with the virtue of justice, we're dealing with the virtue of temperance. So what does this have to do with? Well, it's about one's heart. If one's heart makes one want to increase the punishment, then we're dealing with the passion of the heart, which belongs then to cruelty, not injustice. So therefore, it needs to be moderated by a part of temperance, which is clemency. So cruelty differs from savagery or brutality. This is the second article. So cruelty is an excess in the mode of punishment, right? And one kind of gets a kick out of, or some type of pleasure out of providing an excess in punishment. That's why it's kind of it's cruel. It's just not an injustice, but it's cruel. He says, St. Thomas says, this is different than savagery and brutality, because savagery and brutality take their name from the wild beasts, the animals. There's no rationality at all for it. Whereas cruelty is an extension, like an exaggeration of something which would otherwise be good, right? So proper punishment for an activity would be what is proper if it's according to reason. If it goes excessively so, then it's cruelty. A savage or a brutal person, they actually don't even care about the wrong that the person has done. They just derive pleasure from torture, right? Torturing man, right? This might be more synonymous, maybe television or movies, but there's fighting a good war because you believe in the principles of the war. And then there's some people in movies, I imagine there might be in real life too, who they just love the savagery of war, right? It's not about the principles, it's because they get to do awful things to their fellow human beings, and that's what they're into. That's different. Worthy of discussion, this idea that animals are savage and brutal. Well, it's a bit, worthy of a conversation. Do you think animals are savage and brutal? Finding pleasure from the torture of another. Maybe a cat. Cats kind of do that a little bit with mice. But in general, most animals, they just hunt to survive. Right? In some ways, it's humans that can be the most brutal. Humans are the ones that torture people. Animals typically don't torture one another. They just hunt to survive. It's humans that kind of have a twisted nature sometimes. So interesting if you want to talk about that in class. So in conclusion, I guess the why it's kind of more the image of savagery is if you see how an animal hunts, they like a cat, they can sometimes just rip an animal limb from limb as their way of eating it. That's kind of that image of torture. It's not really the animal's intent, but it is sometimes in practice how it looks. So cruelty is opposed to clemency. It's the vice connected with clemency, the virtue of clemency. And cruelty is not the same as savagery, since cruelty is an extension of, an exaggeration of some type of just punishment, but it has a cruel intention, right? It has a heart that likes the punishment more than it loved the virtue that it should have been supporting. So next we are moving forward with modesty. Next question.